Hopefully you have your Bibles open up to Genesis chapter 47. Genesis chapter 47 is where we are. And Jacob has now gone down to the land of Egypt. He has seen Joseph after many, many years. They had a tearful and emotional reunion. But there still are some things to be settled as far as where the children of Jacob are going to live. And also it is getting near the end of Jacob's life. And so Jacob is settling his own affairs, as it were, as well. Genesis chapter 47, start reading with me in verse 1. Then Joseph went in and told Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers and their flocks and their herds, and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen." He took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, "What is your occupation?" So they said to Pharaoh, "Your servants are shepherds, both we and our fathers." They said to Pharaoh, "We have come to sojourn in the land, for there is no pasture for your servants' flocks, for the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land, and let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock." So last time we talked about Genesis 46, we noticed that Joseph had a plan for his brothers, that he was going to get them to live separately in the land of Goshen because they were shepherds, they were livestock managers, and that the Egyptians loathed shepherds. It was an abominable thing to be a shepherd to them, most likely because of their religion. And so Joseph says, we've got an opportunity, we just need to kind of get our story straight. And again, this is not a deceitful thing that Joseph is doing. They are shepherds. He just wants to make sure that they say the right things in order for Pharaoh to grant them what they want. And so Joseph goes in, does his part. He says, my father and my brothers and their flock and their herds and all that they have come out of the land of Canaan. He mentions their flocks, and he talks about how they're shepherds. And then he picks 5 men from his brothers, and they come in and they tell Pharaoh that they are shepherds. And they say, "Now therefore let your servants live in the land of Goshen." And Pharaoh grants their request, but he doesn't just grant their request. He shows kindness once again to Joseph. This is something that we've seen over and over again, that Pharaoh does not seemingly think of Joseph as just an underling, but rather he thinks of him as more than that. He is fond of Joseph. He says, "Your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is at your disposal." And then he says, "Settle them in the land of Goshen." So he says, do what you want, Joseph. Do what is pleasing to you. The implied idea there is, you have my favor, it's okay. And he says also, if you know any capable men among them, then put them in charge of my livestock. He trusts Joseph's family as well because of Joseph and who Joseph is. And I think that that's important to note. Continue reading with me in verse 7. Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How many years have you lived?" So Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years of that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning." And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had ordered. Joseph provided his father and brothers and all his father's household with food according to their little ones. So Jacob is presented before Pharaoh. The first thing I want to note is Jacob's humility. Some might see this as Jacob kind of complaining. I don't see that as the case. Here he is being presented before the ruler of the land, the ruler known as Pharaoh, who has great prestige and great honor. And Pharaoh asks Jacob a question, and what I see is humility in Jacob, that he says, the years of my sojourning are 130, few and unpleasant. I think what he is saying is, I'm not anybody. I'm not anybody to you, Pharaoh. And he says, the years that I have not attained the years that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning. So he doesn't measure up to his fathers as well. And the spirit of humility that Jacob presents before Pharaoh is admirable, I think. But there may be more going on that meets the eye here. This is probably some Eastern culture thing that we don't necessarily pick up on. Yes, Jacob is being humble, but also it says that he blessed Pharaoh twice. He blessed him when he came in, and he blessed him when he went out. The book of Hebrews tells us that the greater blesses the lesser, right? That Melchizedek was blessing Abram, and that showed that he was greater than Abram. Well, when we see that Jacob is blessing Pharaoh, we need to understand then that this principle once again applies, and that at the very least, Moses, I think, is showing us that Jacob is better than Pharaoh. And you think this being written to the children of Israel, this would show up to them as, oh yes, our father is greater than Pharaoh, under whom we now serve, under whom we did serve. That would be a lesson for them to understand from this. Also, we see that Joseph provided. Joseph was not just playing at pretenses to get to see his father. Even after Jacob dies, he does not change his face or anything like that. Joseph is truly caring for his family here. And it says that he provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food. He has been appointed as leader over Egypt, and in a sense appointed as leader over his family, and he is making sure that they are taken care of. Not just his father, but his brother, all his brothers, all his father's household are being taken care of. Continue reading with me in verse 13. Verse 13 says, Now there was no food in all the land, because the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. Joseph gathered all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain which they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. When the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, Give us food, for why should we die in your presence, for our money is gone? Then Joseph said, Give up your livestock, and I will give you food for your livestock, since your money is gone. So they brought livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses and the flocks and the herds and the donkeys. And he fed them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. When that year was ended, they came to him the next year and said to him, We will not hide from my lord that all our money is spent, and the cattle are my lord's. There is nothing left for my lord except our bodies and our lands. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we and our land will be slaves to Pharaoh. So give us seed that we may live and not die, and the land may not be desolate. So we see that the famine is continuing to march on, and it's just getting worse and worse. And it's so severe that all of the money in the entire land has been spent on buying food for their families and for them. All the money is now in the treasury of Egypt. And the people are desperate. They say, give us food, our money is gone, but they have something else to give, their livestock. And we'll talk in a moment about Joseph taking their livestock and what that shows. But the next year comes, they've already given up all their livestock, and they say, well, we've got nothing else. We'll sell ourselves and all our land, just as long as you keep us alive. The people are truly desperate in this situation. But Joseph shows shrewdness here. When the people initially come to him and say, we don't have any money, he says, give up your livestock and I will give you your food for your livestock. And so Pharaoh gains many possessions in that way. And then again, the people are asking, and they're willing to sell their land, and they want to be given seed, and Joseph is going to grant that request. And Joseph is showing shrewdness, and he's showing wisdom and how he is ruling over these people in this difficult situation. Continuing on with this thought, let's read in verse 20. So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for every Egyptian sold his field, because the famine was severe upon them. Thus the land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, he removed them to the cities from one end of Egypt's border to the other. Only the land of the priests he did not buy, for the priests had an allotment from Pharaoh, and they lived off the allotment which Pharaoh gave them. Therefore they did not sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, behold, I have today bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Now here is seed for you, and you may sow the land. At the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and 4/5 shall be your own for seed of the field, and for your food, and for those of your households, and as food for your little ones. So they said, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves. Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt valid to this day, that Pharaoh should have the fifth. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. What I want to note in this section is Joseph's fairness. The people have sold themselves, and they've sold their land into the hands of Pharaoh. Pharaoh owns everything. But Joseph, even though Pharaoh legally owns everything, he makes it a statute that when they sow their seed and when they harvest, 4/5 shall belong to them, and 1/5 is for Pharaoh. Now he could have been very severe and said, hey, give everything to Pharaoh, you'll get what you need for food, but that all belongs to Pharaoh. But he didn't. He shows fairness in this tough situation, and he says, this is what we're going to do. 4/5 belongs to you, and that's going to be yours to continue to sow your seed, and also as food in your house for your little ones. But they're going to continue to be able to provide for themselves in a way. They just have to pay kind of a tax. And because of Joseph's fairness and his wisdom and how he handled the situation, he earned the people's favor. They say to him, you have saved our lives. Let us find favor in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's slaves. The people are, you could say, fans of Joseph. They understand that it was through his hand that he delivered them. And that's something that we should think about, is that not only did Joseph deliver his family, but Joseph is a deliverer of all the land of Egypt. And again, a theme that we're kind of seeing in this chapter is that the family of Jacob, the family of Israel, is greater than Egypt. And this would be another case of that. The people have favor toward Joseph. He was their deliverer during this time, and he dealt mercifully and fairly with the people. And of course, the children of Israel should learn that lesson as Moses is writing this to them and showing them that indeed they are greater than Egypt, because they are descendants of Jacob and descendants, some of them, of Joseph. Let's close out the chapter starting in verse 27. Now Israel lived in the land of Egypt in Goshen, and they acquired property in it, and were fruitful and became very numerous. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time came for Israel to die, drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "Please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt. But when I lie down with my fathers, you shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." And he said, "I will do as you have said." And he said, "Swear to me." So he swore to him. Then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. We want to note how long Jacob lived. He lived 130 years in the land of Canaan, or Paddan Aram for part of that. But then he lived 17 years in Egypt. So 147 years in total. But as his time to die drew near, he calls Joseph to him and has Joseph make a covenant with him. That's what the placing the hand under the thigh signifies, a making of a covenant. So what does he want Joseph to do? What does Jacob want Joseph to do? He says, "Don't bury me in Egypt, but carry me out of Egypt and bury me in the burial place of my fathers." He says he's going to lie down with his fathers, and then he says, "Bury me in their burial place." So that would be the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Isaac and Sarah and others were buried. And Joseph heeds his father's wishes and says, "I will do as you have said." And Jacob wanted it sworn, and he swore to him. But then Israel bowed in worship at the head of the bed. He worshiped on his staff, according to the book of Hebrews. That's talking about a bed staff. So Joseph shows faithfulness to his father and willing to do what his father has said. And I do think that it's interesting that of all the people he calls Joseph, not even Judah, who has definitely earned Jacob's trust, but it's Joseph who is charged with this. That's an interesting thing to note as well. We're going to see in the next few chapters of Israel's last days, and I probably will combine 48 and 49. I'm not sure about that, but I might. But we're going to see Israel in his blessing, but Jacob's last days are upon us as we are reading this. And when we reflect back on Jacob's life, it was complex, to say the least. He started off by being a supplanter and being a deceiver and deceiving his brother Esau, or not really deceiving him, but bartering for his birthright. When Esau was so hungry that he felt like he was about to die, and Jacob says, I'll give you a pot of stew if you give me your birthright. So that deceitful nature comes out, and once again he steals Esau's blessing. It was supposed to be Esau's because he was the oldest, and Isaac was going to give it to Esau, but Jacob dressed up as his brother and deceived his aging father into giving Esau's blessing to him. And that deceitful nature does continue for a time, but Jacob grows out of it. And when I say grows out of it, I don't mean that it's a phase or something like that, but he matures. He becomes more godly. And the reason that Jacob is able to develop the way that he does and become a righteous man, and at the end of his life he's blessing Pharaoh, he's greater than Pharaoh, is because of his faith. Because he was the one who wrestled with God. That is, he clung to God no matter what. And he wasn't perfect along the way, though he did become more godly in his lifetime. But what is noted about Jacob, and noted about every other Old Testament character, as we sometimes call them, is either their faith or faithlessness. Are they willing to cling to God and follow Him no matter what? Jacob was willing to follow God no matter what. And that's what we should take from his life. We too should be willing to follow God no matter what. We should be willing to say, this presents a difficult situation, what God has told me to do, but I trust that if I do things His way, that everything is going to turn out for the better. And you can apply that to every single situation of your life. And we can start worrying, and what about this and what about that? But at the end of the day, it always comes back to, if we cling to God and do things His way, things are going to turn out for the better. And look how they turned out for Jacob. Look how they turned out for Joseph as well, as we're coming to the end of his story. He clung to God. He did what he was supposed to do. And it ultimately turned out for the better for him. This evening I'd ask, where do you stand in your relationship with God? Are you doing what He says no matter what? God has said that you must believe in His Son, Jesus Christ, in order to be saved. That you must repent of your sins and confess Jesus' name before men and be baptized for the remission of sins to be saved. Have you done that? If you have done that, are you continuing to follow God's will and clinging to Him and doing what He says no matter what? Where does your relationship with God stand? This evening, if you have any need, won't you make it known as we stand and as we sing?